Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me back. I've got to be honest, I wasn't nervous last time. I wasn't nervous at all speaking to, this is the largest gathering of people I've ever spoken to. And I wasn't nervous at all last time. But this time I was incredibly nervous because I actually know that about 200 of you, I've probably worked with something like 200 people here through different workshops, different events. And then suddenly you get very nervous knowing that the people you're talking to know you don't know anything. Whereas when you're actually your first time, you can get away with it. And also, I use the same jokes. I'm very green. I'm very into recycling things. So I tend to recycle all my jokes. And then I just found out that that's obviously not going to work this year either. So thank you very much for having me back. And the one difference is I have learnt to say, one of my passions is actually learning to say thank you in lots of different languages. If you learn to say thank you in all the Central European languages, if you're in London, you get so many free coffees. Trust me. Trust me on that one. So it's really delightful to be able to say Enkosi Kakul, Danki, and Niabonga. So thank you very much for having me back. Actually, I've got to tell you about Rich. I've got to tell you this story. Sorry about this. Richard, and none of this is in the script. I'm sorry. I'll stick to the time, I promise you. But Richard, I thought Richard was a really cool guy. I've really, really been impressed with him, and I just thought he was amazing. Then I met him in London, and he told me this story, and that story, I've got to tell you, just wasn't cool. So Richard, at the time, was single. And that's important as a background drop, yeah? He's on a Virgin airline coming back from the States or something. And he's in business class or first class. I think it was first class. And he looks the kind of, let's be honest, he looks the kind of rock star guy. Well, he doesn't look like a business guy anyway. And he's on the crew, and this is a story he chose to tell me. And a beautiful air stewardess from Virgin says to him, "Are you in a rock band?" And he says, "No, I'm a communication specialist." I mean, what's worse is he told me the story. So anyway, look how cool I am. So I'm going to talk to you about this, and I want to talk about just a year on. So it's not going to be very technical. If I do have any kind of moments of revelation, I'll obviously speak to that. But I just want to really observe. This is my 5th trip in less than a year to Cape Town, and I still did not get Platinum Air Mile status. I missed it by 2,500 air miles. And that was the only thing I was focused on last year. But this year I'll get it, hopefully. So I'm just going to talk about my observations. And the funny thing to notice is, coming here, it becomes one of these landmark events. A lot has happened since I came here. I just want to share some of those things. So since our last chat, I have been made Goodwill Ambassador to the state of Arkansas, which was pretty awesome. And that's me, the one on the right. And what was really interesting was that I've got to tell you a story, and I know this is going out live, and I hope nobody from Arkansas is seeing this. But I think it's like 6 o'clock in the morning or something there. I was actually, and the funniest thing is I'm a Londoner from Indian parents, and I was, I'm here in Cape Town, and I'm going to talk about how working for a Canadian company got me to become Goodwill Ambassador to Arkansas. So it's all a bit weird. Anyway, I was doing some mentoring for the University of Arkansas in Winnipeg in Canada. And I just remember I really enjoyed working with this university, and they invited me to come to Arkansas. And they didn't tell me what was going on, and then they said, "Hey, we'd like to show you a building. We'd like to show you our Capitol building." So I go in, and then I suddenly go into this room to meet the Secretary of State, and I'm wearing jeans. And I wouldn't wear jeans when you're meeting the Secretary of State of a place. And he just decides, and he just launches, and he tells me that I'm this Goodwill Ambassador, and he's interviewing me, and it's really weird because I've never been interviewed before. And he's interviewing me, but he's talking to me sat there, but looking over there to some cameras and stuff, and say, "So Permjot, what do you?" And I didn't know how to handle that, so it's all a bit bizarre. But anyway, I got made Goodwill Ambassador, and that's actually one of my proudest achievements to date, and I still don't know what I did to achieve it. So there you go. So there's a lesson in that. Sometimes success comes when you least expect it. And since my last trip, I've actually been up close and personal with great white sharks, which was awesome in South Africa. That was on my last trip, which was just awesome. And I also, this is Pumba National Park. I don't know if you've been to Pumba. And that is one of the few white lions that's still out there. And this was about a month ago. So that was a pretty incredible experience in terms of Cape Town. But the biggest change is, now I've got to be honest with you, last year, it was the first time I felt really, really old giving a presentation. It was one of the first times for me. I'm now 42, and I was 41 then. And it was really weird being one of the oldest guys in the room. And what really upset me was, I don't know if you could remember, everybody had really flashy presentations, and I just had a standard PowerPoint. And I felt really embarrassed about that. And I was going through a midlife crisis. Now, most people's response to a midlife crisis is to actually buy a red sports car. And this is actually Justin Stanford's, and I wish Justin well. I know he's not very well at the moment. But Justin Stanford, that was his car, and he drove me. Most people have a midlife crisis, or in Justin's case, it's called a mid-puberty crisis. And so I can't afford a red sports car, so I ended up doing the next best thing, which is I bought a Mac. Thank you, thank you. It gets better. I use Keynote. And I've spelt it wrong. I know I spelt it wrong. It's Keynote, not Keynotes. Sorry. So I use Keynotes. But then I also bought the new, or iPad 3, as I think everybody else is calling it. And I've learned to do all these special effects, which I hope you have appreciated. You should. And I know I spoke to some of my students, and thank you very much for turning up. And I spoke to some of my students about the presentation and how to do it, and they said, less is more, don't use so many special effects. I'm sorry, I have to. You have been spared the very first presentation I did with Keynote. It was embarrassing. It was, they have a flame effect where text appears. I'm being serious. And this was the first presentation for MentorCamp. I was going to an investor and saying, look, I need something like $25,000, and this is my pitch. And there were flames, flash bulbs, the whole lot. The whole lot. It reminded me of the worst metaphor I've ever used was, I mixed my metaphors when I was talking to somebody about, I'm a salesman by background. And I was selling this product and said, the great thing about this solution is it allows you to dip your toes in the water without getting your fingers burnt. And it was one of those, and I'm doing the same thing here. So now on to more serious things. What do I think of Cape Town? My Cape Town experience 1 year on. And the interesting thing is, a lot of people, they come to Cape Town or anywhere else, and after a couple of hours they think, yeah, I know the answers to this place. And the thing I've learned is the more I've traveled, the more time I've spent here, and in Canada, the more certain I am of what I know. So you actually get more and more confused about things. And nobody has the answers, and there never will be a time when we actually have all the answers. But it's just interesting, so I'm just sharing my personal experiences. So since the last trip, what I've observed is I've made formal visits, so this is my 5th. I've worked with around 30 companies here, and I've invested in one company, and I'm just about to invest, hopefully by the end of this week, in another company based here. And I also ran a mini mentor camp. Mentor camp, I mean, Rob's going to talk about it later, because hopefully there's a great opportunity for some companies here to get involved. But it's basically the idea that what I think a lot of companies lack is just the global connectivity and the idea that, the ability and the means to just truly go global through being mentored and through getting those connections. So that's one of the things that, I think Rob will speak and do it better justice next. What are my observations? One thing is I absolutely still love the place. When I phoned up my friends, and we had some great people coming over, about 8 people from all over the world came to Cape Town, it was the easiest thing to sell. People thought you had to pay these mentors to come here, and you don't. One of my principles is you never pay mentors. You can pay coaches and you can pay consultants, but you never pay mentors. Mentoring is something you always do for free. So as a mentor, I never ever charge. I do as a consultant, as a coach. And we can go through if anyone's interested, I'm happy to talk about the differences in definitions. I still absolutely love the place. And when I was phoning up all these friends, and you've got to remember, Canada, cold, like really cold. February, really, really cold. So I timed it to perfection. I phoned people up in January and February saying, do you want to come to Cape Town where it's summer, in March? And everybody said, yes, please. Yes, please. And one of them had just had a child, so they said, how long can I come for? And I said, at least 2 days. You'd have to be here for at least 2 days. He says, make it a week, and I'll come. The lack of sleep is killing me. One of the other things I noticed is you genuinely welcome feedback. I had a really good chat with Nick just now about Nick went to London and he met a few people there. And he received 1 or 2 comments, and the way he responded, I think, typifies the way a lot of Cape Townians that I've worked with. Cape Townians, is that the right phrase for people from Cape Town? Okay, Thank you. And he really typified that by saying, actually, it's always good to get feedback. And I think that is something that I have noticed about people here. You genuinely welcome feedback. And I think what's also particularly encouraging is you get the value of mentoring and being coached. And there are 3 things I want to mention about that. It was really interesting when Sylvia was speaking earlier today, and I've got a dilemma. I don't know whether to do this or not, Sylvia. We actually slept together, didn't we? And I've got to admit it. We've actually slept together. And I know you don't want to admit it, but for me, it goes alongside being ambassador of Arkansas. Now, what happened was... No, what actually happened, to spare her blushes, I couldn't believe my luck. I don't know that many people from Cape Town, and I'm on a flight, and she just happens to be on the same flight, and I just happened to have spare seats next to me, so we ended up flying together. And also, I think the people always use a phrase sleeping together. It's not the sleeping that gets you into trouble, it's the staying awake. So we definitely slept, and that was all that happened. But Sylvia actually typified for me the thing I love about this place, in that when we did a coaching session, and we did a mentoring session on a Sunday, and Sylvia just asked me, oh, this is brilliant, but why'd you do this? And that kind of gratitude, and sometimes you don't get that, and people like to be acknowledged. I think in sales, in business, we talked about the customer experience, a brilliant presentation just before lunch about creating unique, brilliant customer experiences. People like to be acknowledged, and it's just really nice when people do say thank you. And I also want to say Patrick Caton, and I know that he can't be here today, he's in Johannesburg, but the Cognition team are here. And they, the South Africa trip happened because of them. It was their way, actually, of saying thank you that he introduced me to the Ramp Foundation. And I'm very, very grateful to the Ramp Foundation and the other sponsors like Saratoga and Old Mutual, who've enabled these kind of things to happen. So thank you. And the other thing is airport drives. I started this experiment here because you guys love Twitter. You guys absolutely love Twitter. I've actually given some advice to people outside of South Africa. If you want to increase your Twitter followers, forget all these social media experts, just do something and put the hashtag Cape Town. Guaranteed to get loads and loads of Twitter followers. And one of the things I did was I actually tweeted that I'm happy to give somebody half an hour's free mentoring if they're happy to give me a lift to the airport. And I was overwhelmed. Within half an hour, I got 7 or 8 responses. And one of the speakers here, actually, Rory, was the first person who actually offered me a lift to the airport in exchange for some mentoring. So that to me, again, typifies one of the things about South Africa. In my trips here, I've never yet had to catch a taxi to or from the airport. In Canada, I still do every single time, have to catch a taxi. So I've got to say some negatives, and I really hate doing this bit, but there are some negatives, and I'd say positive negatives, as in hopefully there's some feedback there. The first criticism I would have is that I still don't think a lot of the businesses here think globally enough, and I don't know what it is. And people say, is it we lack confidence? Is it this? And I don't know the answer to that. I really don't know the answer, but you're still not thinking global enough. Or when you do think about global, you think about Africa. Now, everyone keeps saying Africa's the next big market, Africa is the next big market. And I do think there's huge truth in that. But it's the next big market, and what I think you should be doing is focusing on the big markets that exist today. And Africa will come. Absolutely, this will be Africa's century, I have no doubt about that. The other thing that I think a lot of you will agree with is that there's not enough competition, probably, amongst providers of capital. There are very, very few providers. And I think one of the things I hope MentorCamp ends up doing is bring lots and lots of angel investors and lots of VCs to look at what's going on here, because it's very, very exciting. And I think competition is good. I do believe in competition. It's very, very good. And I actually think there's a need for more diversity in the entrepreneurial landscape. And I don't mean any kind of political statement in that. But I think what happens is, and research after research shows, that when you have a really good diverse makeup of people, your thinking becomes more creative. You think differently. There are too many assumptions that people make, and I love that word, assume makes an ass of you and me. So there are loads and loads of assumptions going on because we're all in a homogenous group. So I think diversity in the entrepreneurial landscape will be a good thing for everyone. Everyone benefits from competition. And the one thing I would say is I think people do here need to learn to pitch more effectively. And certainly we've been doing some workshops, and I'd like to think that that is something that can be taught. But people do need to pitch, because pitching is actually really, really simple. People always, especially if you're in the digital world, it's always much more complicated, though you don't understand it. A 30-second pitch does not do my business justice. I hear that every single time from the most complicated businesses that they think they're running, whereas actually what they're doing is very, very simple. So in terms of turning that into positive advice, what would I say? I would actually say you really have some phenomenal stuff coming out of here. You really, really do. I've really been impressed with the quality of the business I've seen. I've invested in one, as I said, looking to invest in another, hopefully by the end of this week. And hopefully there'll be some more opportunities as well. So there is some great stuff, and I think you should revel in that confidence. And there are loads of businesses doing very well here. And like I've already said, think global, beyond Africa. Think about what are the best markets for you. One of the interesting things that you notice about companies that go global is sometimes a foreign market is much better suited to them than a domestic market is. So don't always assume the first market is the domestic one. I'm on the board of a company I invested in Canada called Blue Light. And actually all of our sales, we've been going for 2 years, all of our sales up to this point have come from outside of Canada. All of them. Another business that I think is awesome is called Celtx, CELTX.com. Have a look at it. It's an awesome, awesome, awesome business. 97% of their revenue comes from outside of Canada. And they have something like 4 million downloads or something crazy. So have more confidence. But although I feel very wary telling people to have more confidence, it never works, does it? You need to have more confidence. That doesn't really help, does it? And then let players in the ecosystem help. The thing that's really impressed me is, I don't know if people know Jenny McKinnell, who runs Cape IT Initiative. And there are other people. Jenny McKinnell I mentioned in person because she's been a fantastic supporter of the stuff that I've been trying to do and really put her neck out there for me. There are people like Jenny and lots of other people who genuinely want to help the ecosystem. Let them help. Some more advice. One thing I would say is avoid being hella famous. Now, there are probably people from Canada watching this as well, but they'll know exactly what I mean. I work in a place called Halifax. And there are loads of people who think they're really well networked because they know everybody in Halifax. And the phrase for them is Halifamous. I think you need to avoid that. Do not aim to be famous just in Cape Town. The world is your stage. You shouldn't aim to be famous anyway. You should aim to be effective and be really known for your products and let the product and the brand speak for itself. But again, look elsewhere. There's a theme running here, in terms of thinking bigger. And look for external validation. One of the critical killers of businesses, and I think there are 4 distinct stages to startups. There's the idea validation stage. Make sure as early as possible you get your idea validated. You've got X Factor in this country, haven't you? Or Dancing with the Stars or something like that. You have talent shows like that. I hate those talent shows. Absolutely hate those talent shows. And you always spot the spoilt kids. The spoilt kids are the ones whose parents have told them, oh, honey, you are so good at singing. You are so good at singing. And the first time they realize they're shit at singing is when they go on stage in national TV and they bomb. What they could have really done with is some external validation. Okay? Make sure when you have an idea, you get that external validation as quickly and as possibly you can. Asking your parents or your best friends, do you think this business idea is a good one? They're probably not the most neutral and impartial of observers. And then do go for much more global input through things like MentorCamp, which we'll be bringing here as well. And one thing I'd have to say to you is you absolutely have to succeed. You really have to succeed, and you can. And the reason why you have to succeed is I think that, obviously, we all know that South Africa faces many challenges, many problems. And I think that South Africa can, through entrepreneurship, solve many of its problems. One of the things I passionately believe in, and my politics are very progressive, and one of the things I passionately believe in is that democracy is, running backwards, if you like, one of the things that history teaches us is that no 2 democracies have ever gone to war, which is quite an interesting thing when you think about the world history. No 2 democracies have ever gone to war with each other. It's only been a democracy against a dictatorship or 2 dictatorships. So I think democracy is the best preserver for world peace. And I also believe entrepreneurship, because it's a great wealth leveler. It's a great creation of new opportunities for people. Entrepreneurship, I think, is the best defense of democracy. So working backwards, I think you have to do that. And this is why I think you have to succeed. Because I think the project, the entrepreneurship project, if you want to call it that, is too important. And I'm always inspired by this quote. People always remember John F. Kennedy's inaugural speech for the quote about, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. But in the same speech, he said this: if we cannot help the many who are poor, we cannot save the few who are rich. And that's the thing that actually passionately drives me. So what I'd like to say is, thank you very much for having me back and for giving me this stage. And obviously, respecting the local, thank you. And Nkosi, Danke, and Niyabonga. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.